Okay, so we started, can you guys online hear me? Yes, no, you guys need to answer. Sarai and Chelsea, you need to put your,
I can hear you.
okay, good. Okay, good. Juliana, actually, let me pause to give, see, we have, 10 minutes. We've got Sarai, Juliana. I think Darius was there, yep. And who am I, Chelsea? Okay, I got it ready. All right. So we are going to talk about emotion today. We just saw a video. Now, normally I like to show you guys, when I show you guys speakers, I like to show psychologists, but this was actually a historian. But I really like this presentation. And there's a couple things that, you know, I'd like to draw out. First, she talks about feeling about feeling. Okay, at one point she says that that's meta emotion, just like we talked about metacognition, when you're thinking about thinking. Meta emotion is when you're thinking about what you're feeling or having feelings about what you're feeling. And when you think about it, that actually, it's a thing, right? It's a thing when you are feeling an emotion and then you're questioning whether or not you should be feeling it, right? Most people, most of us have experienced at some time that moment, okay? So she talked about that. She also talked about, she gave us a lot of really cool words that were words in other languages that those peoples and cultures have for emotions that it's not that maybe we feel, maybe we don't. And she expressed the belief that perhaps knowing this new language would actually lead to feeling those emotions. And can anyone remember when we talked about the theory that language shapes thought? Does anybody remember what that's called? Online people, you can answer too. What's it called? What's the theory that language shapes thought? We talked about it in the developmental chapter. And actually before as well. Nobody remembers? It's going to be on your next midterm. Okay, it's the linguistic relativity hypothesis. Okay, also known as the Whorf-Sapir, sometimes Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Right, and we talked a little bit about how Vygotsky kind of believed that, whereas Piaget really believed the opposite, right? So she talked about that, and then there's one other thing that now I've forgotten what it was. I got distracted on that. Anyway, very important stuff there. Let's go on. I usually start my talks about emotion with this quote from Alexander Pope. The leading passion being what it will, the leading passion conquers reason still. All right, so here's the idea that no matter how much we try to be reasonable and logical, there are moments when passion, which is emotion, just is going to, in the end, it's going to conquer reason, right? And there's still a thing in a lot of states and probably countries that if you kill someone, there's a thing that's a crime of passion. So people who kill a significant other, usually their wife, in a crime of passion, tended to get less severe punishment for that, right? So we, as humans, we tend to cut people a little slack. Let's see, there's another chat here. Okay, good. Okay, so emotion. This is, I didn't record this. So any of you who happen to be watching this video, there's the link for it. I didn't record it because then we get a copyright infringement when I try to put this on YouTube. But this is the really good talk we just saw about emotion. Okay, now let's go into a little detail about how emotion might or might not work with some textbook definitions. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that emotions are not moods. Okay, emotions are specific physiological and conscious feelings of pleasantness, unpleasantness, a variety of different things that are in response to some sort of stimulus, either internal and external, and then you might or might not have a behavioral reaction. You might just try to suppress it or stomp it down, right? But it's as a response to a precise stimulus. Moods, they're quick. Moods last a longer time. Okay, so those also are feelings, subjective feelings that can be positive or negative. and they last for an extended period of time. And during one mood, you might have many different emotions. Now, if we're talking about something like, and we'll come back to this in chapter 14, if we're talking something like a mood disorder, if we're talking about depression, but depression would just be this extended period of time of a negative mood, during which you're going to probably have more negative emotions than positive ones, but they're not the same thing is the point here. So let's keep going. So your textbook definition is just emotion is the feeling aspect of consciousness. Okay, emotions are something you're aware of, you're consciously aware of. Some people are less in touch with their emotions than others, okay? Sometimes people who have, especially those who've grown up with emotional neglect, so that's considered a form of abusive treatment with parents who do not allow their children to express their emotions, and maybe the parents themselves are emotionally unresponsive, don't express their emotions properly, okay? So, and sometimes we can stomp them down, right? We can ignore them. But anyway, conscious feeling is a feeling part of consciousness. Emotions have a physical arousal, a physiological component, right? A beating heart, your heart beats faster, maybe you sweat, etc. And then you have a behavior that shows what you're feeling to the outside world, even if it's just like smiling, right? And then your inner awareness. Now, when it comes to that behavior, okay, that really depends what you're willing to express to the outside world. Depends on where you live and your gender very much, okay? That's called display rules. Display rules are learned ways, norms of controlling displays of emotion in social settings. Some emotions are acceptable according to your culture and according to whether you're a man or a woman. Other emotions are not. Some emotions are acceptable in some places. For example, laughter, okay, is acceptable in most situations, but if you're doing a moment of silence for fallen soldiers, or if you're at a funeral, that's a bad time to suddenly get the giggles, right? So it depends on the time, the culture, who you are, where you are, and so forth. So we talked about this before. There's a lot of different parts of the brain are involved in different aspects of emotions. So we talked about the limbic system as the emotional, the subcortical basis, emotional center of the brain. We talked about the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for the processing of fear, right? And a lot of scientific research shows that the amygdala is kind of like a fear center in the brain. Emotional stimuli travel to it by a fast crude low road, the subcortical road. I believe we talked about this before, but we'll also see a slide in a minute. And the more involved cortical road, which is actually kind of the thinking. And we'll see how this relates to different theories of emotions in a minute. Of course, there's other places, the frontal lobes, anterior cingulate cortex, actually temporal parietal junction. Empathy, of course, involves feeling what other people are feeling. And some people theorize that one of the reasons people can't understand emotions, and there's some evidence of this, we'll talk about it in a minute, is that they don't really feel what others are feeling. The temporal parietal junction is involved in that, and that perspective taking and empathy part of it. So lots of different parts of your brain are involved in emotions. And here we have the high and low roads. Okay, so high road just is basically goes through your cortex. You're doing more thinking about it, but also it allows us to recognize the threat and have that conscious control of it. The low road, it just goes straight through subcortical structures, and that's much faster. You get that immediate fear response, for example, if you see a shark. Okay, so basic emotions. Now, you heard about this in this talk just now. My second computer screen is weird. I hope you guys online are seeing it better than I'm seeing it. It should say anger, disgust. Now fear came up, happiness, sadness, surprise, and some theories talk about pride. There's a lot of other emotions too that we know. Those are the basic emotions. And these, like the speaker talked about, pretty much cross-cultural. And here we have some expressions here. Facial expressions appear to be universal. We have the top left, A is anger, fear, disgust, happiness, surprise, and sadness. And there seems to be quite a bit of similarity across cultures for these things. And remember my research on effects of fiction? I talked about that at the beginning of the semester when we were talking about the scientific process. We talked about social cognition, which is the ability to understand the intentions and feelings of other people, their thoughts, ability to read emotions, right? And I showed people, I talked about how I use the outcome variable where people would read, either fiction or nonfiction or view dramas or documentaries, and then they had to look at 36 pictures of eyes and choose out of 4 options in a multiple choice test, which words best expressed or best express the emotions shown in these eyes. So what do you guys think this person in this picture is feeling? Anyone? If I had a poll set up, I'd have you online people do it, okay? Who thinks she looks surprised? Anyone? You guys online can just hold up your hand if you think about it. Joking, anybody think she looks like she's joking? Happy? How about sure about something? Okay, we got some votes for sure about something in person. What about you guys online? Darius, Sarai, Chelsea, and Juliana, what do you guys think? You live?
She's sure about something.
We have another vote for sure about something.
I feel like she's sure about something.
Anybody else?
But the mouth.
Darius, do you agree with that or do you disagree?
I agree with it. It's just if I see the mouth, that's obviously a telltale sign. But
Yeah, it's tricky when it's just the eyes, right? And again, you guys are little squeaky voices because I haven't figured out the system. So anyway, so yes, the answer is sure about something, right? So now we're going to have our discussion. Hopefully I'll figure out to work on that speaker while we do this. I want you guys to talk about, and basically because we have very few people today, it's just going to be 4 people here and 4 people online. I want you to talk about why the ability to correctly identify emotions in other people, why that might be adaptive. So the result of evolutionary pressure. In other words, why would people who are good at reading emotions be more likely to survive and pass on their genes? Okay, think of at least 2 reasons and be ready to share it. Okay, you're gonna have 5 minutes. You guys in the class, go ahead and stand up and get together, and I'm gonna put you guys online in a breakout room. Okay, got 5 minutes. Well, we'll see if this works or not. You guys already figured it out? All right, well, keep talking. You got a few more minutes. Recording. and I got to figure this thing out. I thought they told me how to figure it out, but it was not true. Okay, theories of emotion. So a lot of different researchers explain emotion in different broad ways. So these are the 4 of the broad ways. The first is the common sense theory of emotion. This is theories of emotion try to explain the relationship between the environment, the emotion we feel, how the physiological aspects of it, and the behavior that comes after it. So common sense theory is that a stimulus leads to emotion, which leads to a bodily response. You see a snake, you feel fear, your heart starts beating, and then you run away, right? And we're going to see all this in a couple repetitions, so don't worry about it if you don't get it right now. James Lange theory holds that you have that physiological reaction to a stimulus, and then you label the emotion. So your heart starts, there's a snake, your heart starts beating really fast, and you say, oh my goodness, I must be afraid. And so then you're aware of that emotion of fear. Cannon-Bard theory, the idea is that, again, you have a stimulus, but what happens is the stimulus goes straight to your brain, which then says, hey, fear, heartbeat at the same time. So the emotion and the physiological response, your heart starts racing and you feel fear at the same time, right? Same time, okay? Stressing the importance of the thalamus, just that the thalamus is the relay station in your brain. We've talked about that before, right? Okay, then we have the cognitive arousal theory. So here it's not only that physiological response, but also the labeling of the response. And the idea is that based on what's going on around you in the environment, you then label your emotion and then feel it as such. So also called the Shasta-Singer or two-factor theory. So think of it this way. Both fear makes your heart, your blood start pumping, your heart beat fast, right? But so does excitement, right? So does excitement. So does physical attraction. And whether you label it as one or the other will depend upon where you are. So there was a famous experiment where a researcher, experimenter approached people on a high, scary bridge, okay? And the participants in this, they felt more attraction and more willingness to go out with a beautiful woman experimenter if they were on a high, scary bridge versus just standing on a sidewalk. So the take home here is if you want to take someone on a date and it's the beginning, maybe take them somewhere where it's a little bit scary and they're going to feel that pounding heart. Think about watching scary movies. Almost everybody in high school, I remember way back then, you'd like to do that with someone they're interested in. Well, that wasn't a bad impulse because that beating heart might be misinterpreted as sexual attraction rather than just, you're on a scary bridge or you're watching a scary movie, right? So let's see more examples of this. Okay, so here is a common sense theory, just spelled out, right? The snarling dog, you see a scary dog, you say, oh, I'm afraid, you feel fear, you're conscious of your fear. And at that moment, okay, your heart starts beating, you start shaking, okay? So scary thing, emotion, physiological response. Does that make sense? Okay. So the difference between the common sense of James Lange is just that the James Lange theory holds that you have this scary stimulus, then your body reacts first. So you start sweating, your heart starts beating, you start shaking, you have that physiological response, and then you say, oh, I'm afraid. And then you have the emotional component, right? Cannon-Bard theory is just like I said, it happens at the same time. You see the scary thing, the dog, your brain, the subcortical, so beneath the cortex, you're not really aware of it, but you have that brain activity that goes boom at the same time, physiological arousal and emotion. Heart starts beating, you start sweating, and you feel afraid all at the same time. And then maybe you run away, which is a good way to get bitten, or you have a more appropriate reaction. So this I already said. The only important addition that this slide has is that The thalamus is what is relaying that information to your cortex and your sympathetic nervous system. So your cortex, that emotional feeling, although that we know it also happens below that, and your sympathetic nervous system is all that fear, fight, the flight or fight response. Okay. Cognitive arousal theory, we talked about this. That's when you have to label it based on what's going on around you. Part of what goes into this is also the facial feedback hypothesis is you are judging based on your body what's going on. And the facial feedback hypothesis gets at this directly. And the idea here is how your face is reacting. The muscles in your face provide feedback or information to your brain that tells you what might be going on, okay? Mainly it causes, but it also intensifies the emotion. And this all started, or it gained like foothold with a study back in 1988, where they had people rate cartoons. And participants were randomly assigned to look at some cartoons, either just look at them or have a pencil or a pen in their mouth. And what putting a pen in your mouth does, if you have a pen, you can put it in your mouth. It activates the same muscles in your face that laughing does or smiling does. And participants who actually held a pen in their mouth rated the cartoons as funnier, or the comic strips. I don't remember if it's comic strips or cartoons, but they rated them as funnier. Okay, since then, in like 2016, we did a lot of what's called, trying to replicate or repeat famous studies in psychology. And they found that this actually, it didn't replicate. That meant like 17 different labs had people stick pens in their mouth and rate different cartoons. So the whole study, the whole facial feedback thing was put a little bit into question, okay? Later they did a little more research, and it just seems to be that just depends if the participants are feeling self-conscious or not. If they're feeling too self-conscious, it doesn't work. All right, so there is something to it. We'll see in a little bit that we have evidence from Botox that kind of supports this. We'll see that in a minute. Okay. Another theory is cognitive mediational theory. And this is the idea that the stimulus must be interpreted or appraised by a person. So this is similar to this, the two-factor cognitive arousal one. But you have to interpret it in order to have that physical response. So first interpreted, then physiological response and emotional reaction. So let's look at a little bit more pictures here. They always help. Okay, back to the Shastra-Singer or two-factor theory, snarling dog. You start feeling, ooh, your heart starts beating, you look around and say, oh, there's a dog, or, maybe it's behind a fence or not, whatever. But here we just see a dog and we have a conscious fear. We fear. We experience emotions. Facial feedback. Okay. Here we have the scary thing and the physiological response. Okay, so that arousal, your face responds to it. So if you go back to the, look, see, I've already forgotten the James Lange theory. Okay, so James Lange theory, you feel that physiological response, then experience your emotion. This is just like a complicated, more complex James Lange theory. You feel that physiological response. Your face has that fear response, that the muscles in your face from that facial expression help your brain interpret it as fear. Does that make sense? So it's adding another step. Okay, then we have another mediational theory. Lazarus is cognitive mediational. So see something scary, you appraise it. Okay, this is kind of gives you a little bit more control over your emotions according to this theory. So you look at your dog, your snarling dog, instead of immediately having the emotion of fear, you notice it's behind a fence. You're not scared, but it isn't behind a fence. You are scared. Okay. You're not scared because the owner has it on a leash, but the dog pulls away. Maybe you should be scared. Okay. So then you have that emotional response and then your bodily response. So scary, notice whether or not you should be afraid. You're either afraid or not. And then your heart starts beating. Okay, so if this seems like there's a lot of different very similar theories, you guys are right. There's a lot of different very similar theories because we don't really know exactly how it happens, right? And we've all been in a situation where when we've felt a fear from something we a second later realized we shouldn't have been afraid of, at least most of us have. So like the other day I saw a gopher snake and for a moment I thought it might be a rattlesnake. Yeah, so it was just a big snake. So here we have a whole list of them all. Oops. I think I have them all on one slide. It's later. No, these are all them. So if you're going to print out a slide, I always suggest that when you take your second midterm, it's going to cover that. This is a good thing to have available. It kind of summarizes everything and it shows you in what order they come, right? Because yes, they're all pretty similar. Okay. So facial feedback, I mentioned that there is a little bit more support of it. So this comes from Botox. So you guys know how Botox works. It basically relaxes the muscles in your face. And people who've had recent Botox injections cannot, their faces aren't as expressive, right? So they have, and then they also have trouble understanding others' emotions and mirroring them. Okay, so the idea is that because your muscles do not work properly because of Botox, you then cannot put your face into the normal expressions it's in when you experience certain emotions. So therefore, you have trouble understanding others' emotions because we instinctively mirror other people's facial expressions, right? Does that make sense? People with Parkinson's also have trouble. They lose like a lot of their muscle control, and they lose a lot of expression in their face, which makes it harder for them to understand emotions as well. So again, some support for the facial feedback hypothesis. Okay, and here, remember, this is actually, we have time because then we're going to start watching the social dilemma. I'm going to show you this article. Let's see. I wonder, did I ever resume? Oh, yes, I did. Good. So let's look at this really quickly. All right, so this, remember I just talked about the facial feedback hypothesis studies. This person right here, Alex Danvers, he's a friend of mine. He's an expert in emotion. So he wrote a column about this if you want to later read it. It's all about the facial feedback hypothesis and very much about the science of psychology too. So it's kind of an interesting thing to read. But we're not going to do it now. Rather than do that, we're going to start the social dilemma because otherwise we cannot finish it on Wednesday. So I'm going to stop the recording here. You can't be recording